A lot of people exercise because they believe it will help them to lose fat.
One of the biggest debates on the planet.
What advice have you got for me?
So this is not a well-known fact, but
Lieberman.
He studies and teaches
How humans are supposed to live.
Author and professor at Harvard University.
Exercise.
Disease, sleep, nutrition.
He has the answers on all of those things that most of us care about.
we evolved to be very physically active, working in the fields, hunting, gathering. But now we live in a world where only 50% of Americans ever exercise, and the rest of the world is headed our way. Cancers, depression, anxiety can attribute that to less physical activity. In fact, women who get 150 minutes of physical activity a week have about 30 to 50% lower breast cancer risks. I mean, it's crazy, right? The problem is that we spend 3% of our medical budget on prevention. And yet 75% of the time, the disease is a preventable disease. It's a completely backward, stupid system.
When you started writing this book about exercise, was there any instant changes that you implemented into your own life?
Strength training. The more I study the importance of doing weights, especially as you age, the more I start kicking myself for being lazy about that. When people retire, they become less active. They tend to lose muscle, and then that starts off a vicious cycle.
So would you say we shouldn't retire?
Well, it's a very modern Western concept, and yes, we do pay a price for it. We evolved to be grandparents. We evolved to live. One of the things that's most interesting about humans, maybe, is that we evolved to live about 20 years or so after we stop reproducing. No other animal does that except orcas, maybe killer whales. But with the exception of killer whales, humans have this really weird life history. We evolved to be grandparents. But grandparents in the old days weren't, retiring to Florida, or I don't know what they do in England or whatever, go to Mallorca or whatever, and kick up their heels and play golf or whatever with carts. Grandparents in the olden days, right, or in many cultures still today, are working, right? They're working in the fields, they're hunting, they're gathering, they're getting food for their children and their grandchildren, they're helping with childcare. And that physical activity is, that's what their job is, to be physically active. But in turn, that physical activity turns on an amazing suite of physiological processes that counter aging. Turns on repair and maintenance processes that not only keep our muscles strong, but also keep our DNA from accruing mutations, keep our mitochondria numbers high, keep the cells in our brain from accumulating gunk, so that prevents Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. I mean, for every system of the body, physical activity has benefits that slow the aging process. And so when you stop doing it, you accelerate, and that's the way in which you perceive it as accelerating aging. But really, it's the absence of physical activity which lets aging run amok.
One of the things that are popular in culture as well is this idea of doing 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah, now that's fun. That started because of a Japanese pedometer. But right before the Olympics were in Tokyo in the 60s, they had invented the pedometer, and they were sitting in a boardroom, and they were discussing what to call the pedometer. And they picked, out of the blue, they picked 10,000 steps because that's apparently an auspicious number. And it sounded about right. There was no science behind it. Interestingly, it turns out it's pretty good. If you look at steps per day and health outcomes, your average hunter-gatherer walks between 10 to 18,000 steps, depends on male, female, etc. And if you look at steps per day and outcomes, about around 7,000 to 8,000 steps, the curve kind of bottoms out, right? There doesn't seem to be a huge advantage to taking more than that per day in terms of large epidemiological studies. So it turns out to be not that bad a goal, but it's not a perfect number like a lot of things, right? It's just it's a reasonable goal to shoot for. And that loss of activity has enormous effects on every aspect of our body. I mean, and our minds. I mean, physical activity is important not just for physical health, but also vital for mental health. And I think a lot of the problems that a lot of mental health issues we have today, depression, anxiety, some of them, to some extent, we can attribute that to less physical activity. And as people age, becoming less physically active, again, makes them much more vulnerable to a wide suite of diseases.
What about sleep then?
So sleep is another interesting one. So this idea that, that you need 8 hours of sleep has been around for a long time. It's been around basically since the Industrial Revolution. But if you actually, so colleagues in my field, so in evolutionary medicine, have put sensors on people who don't have all the things that we're told have destroyed sleep. So think about it. We're told that TV and lights and our phones and all these things are preventing us from sleeping. Edison destroyed sleep, right? So when you put sensors on people who don't have any electricity, and they don't have TVs, and they don't have phones, and they don't have any of these gadgetry, right? Electricity. It turns out they sleep like 6 to 7 hours a night, and they don't nap. So this idea that natural human beings sleep 8 hours a night is just nonsense. It's just not true. And furthermore, when you start looking at the data, 7 hours, if you graph sort of how many hours a night you sleep on the x-axis and sort of some outcome like cardiovascular disease or just how likely you are to die, it's kind of a U-shaped curve. So people who don't get much sleep are in trouble. But the bottom of that curve is pretty much always about 7 hours. So people actually do better if they sleep 7 hours rather than 8 hours. And yet we're told that if you don't sleep 8 hours, there's something wrong, right?
So you can oversleep.
And there's also strength training, right? Which is also important. So there's no look. We've tried to medicalize exercise, right? It's like there's a proper dose, right? Take this pill, this many milligrams, this many times per week, right? Exercise, it doesn't work that way. There is no optimal dose. Everybody's different. It depends on, are you more worried about heart disease or Alzheimer's or diabetes or depression, or are you previously injured? Are you fit? Are you unfit? It's impossible to prescribe exercise in this kind of medicalized way. It doesn't work.
A lot of people exercise because they believe it will help them to lose fat, belly fat.
One of the biggest debates on the planet.
It has been a huge debate. Even on this podcast, I've had multiple people come and say a whole range of things about weight loss and cardio. And I'm I don't know what to believe anymore.
Well, anybody who isn't confused doesn't understand what's going on, right? It's sad that it's such a debate, but that's how science works, right? So, as you know, I wrote about that in this book. Part of the explanation for the debate is that, again, what dose are you analyzing in what population, in what kind of context, right? So pretty much every major health organization in the world recommends that you get 150 minutes per week of physical activity. That's kind of like the benchmark. That's what the WHO, the World Health Organization, considers the division between being sedentary versus active. So, and a lot of people who are unfit and overweight and struggling to be physically active have struggled to get 150 minutes a week, right? So a lot of studies prescribe 150 minutes a week of exercise, walking, for example, or moderate intensity physical activity, and then look at its effects on weight loss. And guess what? When you walk 150 minutes a week, which is 20 minutes a day of walking, which is about a mile a day, you're not going to lose much weight. You're basically burning about 50 calories a day doing that, right? That's a piddling amount of calories compared to drinking a glass of orange juice, right? So surprise, surprise, those kinds of studies show that those doses of physical activity are not very effective for weight loss. However, plenty of rigorous controlled studies that look at higher doses of physical activity, 300 minutes a week or more, find that they are effective for helping people lose weight, but not fast and not large quantities. So you're never going to lose a lot of weight really fast by exercising. It's just not going to happen. Because, a cheeseburger has 800, 900 calories. You have to run, 15 kilometers to lose that, to burn the same number of calories. You're going to be hungry afterwards too, so you're going to make some of that back. You have compensation. So physical activity is actually, there's just no way around it. You have to be a flat earther not to argue this way. But physical activity can help you lose weight, but it's not going to help you lose a lot of weight fast and not at the low doses that often are prescribed. But the one thing that we do agree on, and I think this would not be controversial, is that physical activity is really important for helping people prevent themselves from gaining weight or after a diet from regaining weight. And there are many, many studies which show this. One of my favorite studies ever published, without a doubt, is a study done by a guy named Ralph Paffenbarger. He realized that places like Harvard are fantastic for studying aging because Harvard, like other private universities, never lets go of their alumni. So until the day you die, they're asking you for money on a regular basis. and so he got the Alumni Association, the Harvard Development Office, to let him follow a series of Harvard alumni from several years and can keep asking them questions about their physical activity levels and also their diet and whether they smoked and stuff like that. And then you track them for 25, 30 years. And what he found was that the alumni, after you corrected for every factor you could think of, that as the alumni got older, the effect of physical activity on their health outcomes was bigger and bigger. So alumni who were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, for example, who were exercising 4 or 5 times a week, they had about 20% lower death rates. By the time they got to their 60s and 70s, the alumni who were exercising more had 50% lower death rates. So as you get older, and this has been replicated again many times, but what he showed was that as you get older, exercise becomes more, not less important for maintaining your health. And they tracked them for months afterwards, because most people after a diet, the weight comes just crashing back, right? The policemen who kept exercising, even after the diet was over and they went back to eating whatever the hell they wanted, donuts, whatever, they're the ones who kept the weight off. But the ones who didn't exercise, whoosh, the weight came crashing back. Every university in the world used to require, and every school, right, supposedly requires exercise, right? I'm sure you had physical exercise, some kind of phys ed required in your school. Those standards are slipping around the world, and more kids are doing less and less in school. Universities are no exception. It used to be that all universities required some degree of physical education. Mine was no exception. In fact, Harvard was a leader in that back in the 100-something years ago. I think so those are, again, social ways to help people be more physically active. So I think there are multiple ways of doing that, and I suspect that is going to be the most effective sort of set of tools that will help people.
One thing I actually do is that on the screensaver of my phone, it has something that really inspires me. So I see it every day, and it's that reminder for me, which reinforces my why across my life. It's actually my home screen on my iPhone is actually a bit of a mood board for me. We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're going to leave it for. And I don't get to see it until I open the book. The question is, what is one aspect or feature of your life that causes you the most friction / discomfort, and how can you change or fix it? You were going through a series of diseases a second ago, Alzheimer's, high blood pressure, all of these kinds of things, cardiovascular diseases. I almost think we've come to assume that these are inevitabilities of life.
Yeah.
We'll get cancer.
Yeah.
One of us will get, someone in here is going to get Alzheimer's. And that's the way we live. So we're preparing to medicate when that day comes.
That's right.
I get, God forbid, diagnosed with something.
That's absolutely right. In fact, that's what medical students today are taught, right? If you go to medical school today, you're taught that as people get older, their blood pressure goes up. I can tell you that's just not true. It's in the Western world where people are physically inactive and eat crap diets that their blood pressure tends to go up. But there are plenty of people, I'm actually one of them, right, who don't have high blood pressure as they age. And guess what's the best way to prevent getting high blood pressure as you age? It's, I sound like a broken record, but we have this idea that as you get older, yes, and we're lucky, right? Because we don't die from smallpox when we're 30. We're lucky to get cancer when we're 60, right? What we've done is we've confused diseases that are more common with aging with age being a cause of those diseases in the first place. And they're not inevitable diseases. And many of them are preventable. And the problem is that in our society, we don't value prevention very much. We may talk about it, but we don't really put our money where our mouth is, right? In the US, which is arguably one of the worst healthcare systems, it is the worst healthcare system among the industrialized Western world, we spend approximately 3% of our budget, our medical budget, on prevention. And yet when people walk into a doctor's office, 75% of the time the disease is, according to the Center for Disease Control, a preventable disease. So we essentially spend nothing to prevent diseases that overwhelm our system and cause enormous amounts of misery. It's a completely backward, stupid system. And so, and the good news is it's not that hard to prevent a lot of these things. It takes willpower and takes education, and it takes access to good quality food and whatever. So in the one sense, it's very depressing. On the other hand, the optimist in me says, we really can do something. And people, even if they're not wealthy or whatever, there are simple things that everybody can do to improve their health outcomes.
These diseases we encounter today as we age, and just generally in our society, when you look at hunter-gatherer communities, or you look at certain tribes around the world, maybe in Africa, do you see the same types of diseases in the same level of occurrence. What is the most important thing we haven't talked about, Daniel?
I think the most important thing is that we need to be compassionate towards each other. I mean, there's so much shaming and blaming and prescriptions and, the reason I entitled the book Exercised is that we make people feel exercised about exercise. We make them feel uncomfortable and unconfident and shamed